Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today we're answering a viewer question. Abby K asks, what does the US Postal Service do when a package is mailed with no valid recipient's address and no return address? And just before we get started with the video today, I do want to say that it is brought to you by Backblaze. Get a 15-day free trial at backblaze.com/brainfood. Well, according to the USPS, mail can be considered undeliverable due to a number of factors ranging from insufficient postage to the person it's addressed to refusing to accept it. Regardless of the reason the mail cannot be delivered, the USPS states that all non-mailable pieces are returned to the sender. This seems like a pretty cut and dry statement that leaves very little room for interpretation. However, there's always exceptions to rules, and in the case of undeliverable mail, that exception is things like periodicals, which are deemed to have little to no value after a certain point due to their timely nature, and they'll be disposed of accordingly. That said, publishers can request to have such items returned to them if they so wish. So what about the case with mail that is undeliverable and happens to have no visible or legible return address? So the Postal Service has had measures in place to deal with these so-called dead letters almost since the service first began in earnest in the 1700s with the awesomely named position of Inspector of Dead Letters. This was created by an act of Congress way back in 1777. The first dead letter office, on the other hand, that wouldn't exist until 1825, when the sheer amount of dead mail necessitated the creation of a dedicated service to deal with it all. Today, undeliverable mail without a return address will be pre-processed by postal workers, and unless it doesn't meet certain criteria, which we'll discuss in a moment, it will be sent to the Mail Recovery Center in Atlanta. Interestingly, up until 1992, the Mail Recovery Center was officially known as the Dead Letter Office, but the USPS opted to change it to better reflect the ultimate goal of returning mail. In any event, as noted on their website, the Mail Recovery Center generally doesn't accept anything worth less than about $25 or something that can't reasonably be traced back to someone, like keys, cosmetics, and food. In this case, the items will either be recycled, disposed of, or in some cases, donated to charity. Of course, exceptions can and will be made, but this is handled on a case-by-case basis. For example, if an undeliverable letter or package contains something that clearly has sentimental values, such as photographs, or in one case, postal worker Lori Ferguson Costa had the pleasure of processing a dead package containing a jar that contained a placenta, it will try to be processed to track the original sender or intended recipient, despite it having no real monetary value. Alright, so now you might be wondering, what exactly happens if there's money inside the envelope and despite their best efforts, they can't track down who sent the letter or where to send it to? In this case, it will simply be tallied up and given to the US Treasury. So what goes into the processing step? First, a mail recovery clerk has to physically open the letters and packages to discern exactly what they contain. This makes these people just about the only individuals in the US legally allowed to open another person's mail without it being a federal crime. As you can imagine, this means security is tight and everything the clerks find has to be meticulously recorded and noted down to stop someone just walking out of the building with a pocket full of other people's stuff. Beyond just opening the packages and letters, the mail clerks in question will go to fairly extensive lengths to try and return or deliver dead mail. In one case, noted in a Smithsonian piece on a day in the life of one of these workers, the worker at the center of the article, Vera, opened a package with no identifying marks whatsoever on the outside, but managed to use a phone number contained inside to ultimately track down the package's original owner. In another case, the aforementioned postal worker, Lori Ferguson Costa, got a call from a woman who'd recently had her baby die of SIDS. The woman, who was in tears at the time, explained that she'd mailed a photograph of her baby that she didn't have any copies of. It was the last one taken before the baby's death, but the recipient, the grandmother, never got it. Lori then got a detailed description of what was in the photograph, and after a pretty extensive search around the mail recovery office, managed to find it despite going off of only the woman's description of the picture. Essentially, any clue whatsoever, even small ones in the package, will be followed up on until the clerk manages to find out where the package was intended to go or who sent it. As for how long all of this takes, the usual amount of time the mail recovery office will hold things varies, and this is handled on a case-by-case basis depending on the item and the clerk's preference. For example, if the item in question is clearly worth a lot of money or seems like it probably holds significant sentimental value like a wedding dress or jewelry, the mail recovery office will hold onto it for upwards of a year, and in some cases even longer, such as a jar containing the cremated remains of one W.C.G. McLeod, who lived from 1891 to 1977, which postal worker Vera stated was there since she got the job, and she intends to keep it around until she retires, hoping that someone will claim it. However, since it just isn't feasible for the mail recovery office to hold on to something indefinitely, in the vast majority of cases, after every avenue to return something is explored and they've held on to an item long enough for someone to miss it and file a claim, they are left with no choice but to sell it at a bulk auction, the profits of which are funneled back to the postal service. So, considering all this and all the efforts they make, how successful are these people at bringing dead mail back to life? According to official figures, they are able to deliver or return 68% of dead mail with obvious value, a figure which drops to a lower but not insignificant 43% when you factor in all dead mail. When you consider that only about 0.05% of mail is deemed undeliverable in the first place, that's a pretty remarkable overall delivery rate. Alright, so I really hope you enjoyed that video, and now I would like to remind you that it's important that you back up your files and documents. The reason I'm reminding you about this is because this video is brought to you by Backblaze, a backup service. Now, I really shouldn't need to and probably don't need to sell you on the importance of backing up your files. Losing documents from your computer really sucks. Probably if you're watching this, you've probably been there at some point, whether it's a hard disk failure or doing what I did a couple of months ago. I dumped an entire cup of coffee over my MacBook Air. Now, I did have to worry about getting a new computer, but I didn't have to worry about all of the files on that laptop because Backblaze had them all backed up in the cloud, ready for me to access just like that. Backblaze are a company that I've been using for well over a year now. This sponsorship spot is actually due to me reaching out to them and saying I would like to work with them because I've used their service and like it so much. Why it's so perfect for me is because they have an unlimited amount of data you can back up. Right over there off camera where my computer is, I have 2 external hard drives plugged into my big iMac, and all of the data that's 2 4 terabyte drives that can be backed up. They're not full yet, but all of that data can be backed up. It's a good couple of terabytes to Backblaze, and it's all included. There's no extra fees if you go over. It's really truly unlimited backup, and I'm really testing that. But it's not just me who are backing up with Backblaze. They've restored over 23 billion files, including my ones from that laptop, and store over 300 petabytes of data. For reference, that's 300,000 terabytes. So the way it can work is that you basically go to backblaze.com/brainfood. You can get a free trial through that link. You download the app, it works on Mac or PC, and it backs up all of your files to their servers, completely encrypted. Then when you're changing a file on your computer or any external disk or anything like that, the changes are automatically backed up, so it's really a totally hands-off backup experience. And then if you have some problem or just need to access a file, restoring your files is incredibly easy. If you've lost all of your files, you can simply download them from the service, or if you've got a slow connection or just rather do it via hard disk, they can ship you out a hard disk and then you can return it to them for a full refund. Or if you just urgently need one file or something, you can grab it in an internet browser or even through the app on your mobile phone. Look, as I mentioned, Backblaze it's a truly unlimited backup service, no additional charges, no additional fees, and it basically provides that peace of mind that your documents, your photos, whatever, they're all backed up, and it's just really the easiest way that I know to do that. So really, don't put backing up your files off. It's really easy, it's really affordable, and you can get a free 15-day trial. Just go to backblaze.com/brainfood, and do remember that if you go through that link, it's also in the description below, that it lets Backblaze know that you came from us, and that helps support the show. So as always, thanks for watching.